Before I start reviewing season 1 of the Netflix India series Ray, based on short stories by Satyajit Ray, it's important that I get some disclaimers out of the way. The first is that I was involved in a collaboration with one of the directors of the series, namely Srijit Mukherji, a collaboration that never worked out. I say this because if I don't say it, somebody else definitely will. Second, we'll be discussing thematic issues of the 4 stories, which means plot points will be thrown around freely. So a spoiler alert is in effect. A little bit about me. I'm a writer and I love movies. One reason for that has been Satyajit Ray. I've been inspired by both his films as well as by his short stories. This deep emotional connection, having read and seen everything Satyajit Ray has produced in his lifetime, an experience which is fairly typical for Bengalis my age growing up pre-internet days, provides me with some locus standi, as they like to say, to comment on his work. However, unlike many Bengalis, I do not fetishize Ray. He has some weak movies like Chiriyakhana and Shaka Proshaka as example, and I've never been a huge fan of Feluda and Professor Shonku, and do not consider them to be great examples of children's literature. Of course, this last opinion, I've expressed it before, and whenever I have done so, I've had Bengalis commenting on my opinion with what a terrible author you are, as if that has anything to do with my opinion of Feluda as detective fiction and Shonku as science fiction. The thing is this, I love Satyajit Ray and I don't need to prove this to anyone. Which brings me finally to Ray, the series. The way Ray was presented was that it was a reimagination of Ray's stories. I think the word imagination is very important, as also the little re that comes before it, because it implies that the original imagination of the author will be redone by someone else. That someone else is claiming the right to imagine it again. And I know I'm stretching the point kind of here, but it's important to establish this because the word imagination lies at the core of the deeply divided opinion this series has engendered. It is the imagination of the directors, Srijit Mukherji, Vasan Bala, and Abhishek Chaubey, that people are expressing their opinion of. The imaginations that have been superposed on the original imagination of the great Satyajit Ray. And some people are basically saying, well, how dare they? So what are the contours of good reimagination? While obviously there is no ISO standard for this, let me provide a mental map of how I think of the problem. A faithful, literal cinematization of the original is not a reimagining. And there have been several done on short stories of Ray, some of which are actually quite good. As an example, the Gagan Chaudhary studio episode directed by Shondip Ray, the son of Satyajit Ray with Shashwata Banerjee. It's a fairly good one. And some of these literal translations to film haven't been that great. On the other hand, on one hand, there is this literal translation. On the other hand, there is a reimagination that is universes away from the source material, retaining neither its heart nor its tropes. A product purely of the new director's imagination. That also, in my opinion, is a failure in this genre. Unfortunately, one of the stories in this Ray series is exactly that. Which one it is, I will come to later. For me, a reimagination has to retain the heart of the story, the core emotion, the core conflict. It can be adapted to another time, another place. The ending can be changed, but not so much that it shuts down the heart. And directorial flourishes can be added as required. But the tropes, the assumptions, the emotions engendered by the original stories, they must be maintained. Else there's a problem of truth in labeling. What comes out may be a good standalone, but it is not the reimagining that is being promised. In the case of Satyajit Ray, his short stories were almost exclusively about middle-class, middle-aged, and usually single and lonely Bengali men. For those unfamiliar with the tropes of Ray, his stories usually do not have female characters of any importance, definitely not female characters as pivotal ones. And also, love or sex is never ever hinted at, forget being explicitly shown. Instead, Ray's genius lies in building character quirks, obsessions, paranoia, phobias, insecurities, all deeply asexual, of course, but nonetheless interesting. And because he was such a great director, his stories were very visual. With space and time, the mere act of reading was like seeing a shot. There was sometimes a dash of the supernatural, a bit of mystery, and his best stories leave you with a feeling of comfortable disquiet. Any good reimagination of Roy, in my opinion, needed to maintain these aspects without slavishly translating to screen the story in a sequential fashion. So how do the episodes stack up to the standard? Let's start with episode 1, the one that has many Bengalis and some non-Bengalis seeing red. And I do not mean communist red, which Bengalis are pretty happy to see. Directed by the highly polarizing Srijit Mukherji. And for those of you who do not know who Srijit Mukherji is, when I mean polarizing, I do mean it in the Yogi Adityanath way, in that he triggers extreme opinions with both sides absolutely sure they're right. And this episode is by the name of Forget Me Not. It is based on the Satyajit Ray original story, Bipin Chaudhary's Sritibham, which basically translates to Bipin Chaudhary's memory failure. In the original, Bipin Chaudhary is a rich man. And in the world of Ray, the bar for being rich is shockingly low. The mere owning of a car, in the case of Bipin Chaudhary, or the possession of a Rolex watch, in the case of that corporate captain in Shaka Proshaka, was enough to qualify for being rich. A condition that was accompanied, again in the world of Ray, by arrogance and indifference to the plight of the less fortunate, right up to moral corruption. The old friend fallen on hard times who asks for a loan and is rebuffed by the made it big in life friend is a recurrent trope in Ray's works. Nowhere better than in Class Friend, a story I've never been able to finish without tears in my eyes. And here too, in Bipin Chaudhary's Sritibham, that is the point of conflict. Bipin Chaudhary impolitely avoids a friend looking for a handout. In retaliation, that friend uses a few people in Bipin Chaudhary's immediate social circle, none of whom seem to quite like Bipin Chaudhary a lot, to plant a false memory in Bipin Chaudhary's mind. This is really Inception, if Leonardo DiCaprio wore a dhoti. And as a result, Bipin Chaudhary starts to doubt his sanity. The old friend at the end himself tells Bipin Chaudhary of his gaslighting prank, and all ends well, hopefully with Bipin Chaudhary learning a lesson in humility. Straightforward, simple, low budget. None of these words are true for Srijit Mukherji's adaptation. Everything is amped up to 11. The amount of money being talked about would overflow Casio calculator registers. And whatever mental image you may have about Bipin Chaudhary would be crushed in an instant if you saw Ali Fazal. If that is not jarring enough, there is sex, a lot of it, including one-night stands and extramarital liaisons and make out in public places, which made me shudder thinking of how Bipin Chaudhary may have gotten that blow to his knee in Ranchi, for those of you who have read the original. This is of course where most of the Bhadralok outrage at Forget Me Not comes from. Chi chi Satyajit Babu ki bhabten. This is a valid point, I would say. Most people, probably Ray would not have approved of this kind of pervasive licentiousness. But that to me is not the point of a reimagination, the approval of the original author. To his credit, Srijit does keep the heart of the original story intact. The fragility of memories and the insecurities of men. That is what makes this a successful entry. He, of course, then adds his imagination, which is par for the course because we are watching a reimagination. Though I'm not sure I connected with all of it. Definitely not the directorial flourishes that seem to draw the story further away from the simple tropes of the original, and that too in an overtly obtrusive way. The ending also was a bit too fantastic, a great homage to Abbas Mastan, but not so much Ray. But it worked for me, though I can understand why it would not work for many others. The second of Srijit's reimaginations gets a lot of it right. In the original story, Bahurupi, Nikunjo Shaha is someone who loves cosplay. He disguises himself as other people and enjoys the power of fooling others. But one day, he takes it a bit too far, tries to fool a sannyasi by pretending to be another sannyasi, and then, and this is where Satyajit Ray is at his best, with the open-ended nature of his resolutions, Nikunjo Shah either loses his mind for a while or gets cursed for a while. Srijit dispenses with this ambiguity and the very kid-friendly ending and goes straight for someone gouging their eye out. And this, again, in my opinion, worked, given the overall tone and tenor that he had set in the past hour. This would have been my favorite episode, except for one bizarre creative choice. A parallel subplot, absolutely outside the scope of the original story, and with vast resemblance to the director's previous Vincida, where the main character uses his skills with makeup and prosthetics to take revenge on those he believes have wronged him. There was, in my opinion, absolutely no need for this, unless an hour's length was part of the contractual requirement. And what the superfluous thread did was to dilute the impact of the actual story. This is where the author part of me comes in. There was so much opportunity to write these stories in a different way, to take them to other places. Why not remake Bipin Chaudhary's Sritribhram as a story of a robot in the future who is tricked by other robots into thinking he has forgotten his programming, raising questions not just about his memory, but also about his purpose, since the purpose of a robot is what is in his memory. Or have Bohurupi be about an identity thief set in today's world who steals other people's identities because of the power catfishing gives him, till one day he tangles with a hacker god who ensures that each of the identities he has assumed come back to destroy him. Again, forget what I said. There's just the Bengali in me, but I was just imagining how far we could have taken this and still retain the essence of the original stories. On to the third entry. In Hangama Hai Kyun Barpa, Abhishek Chaubey changes the least the original story, Barin Bhomiker Baram, but also changes it the most, transplanting it to a place radically different from the way Ray visualized it, to the world of ghazals and Audia Nazakat. While the characters here are nowhere close to the middle-aged Bengali Bhadralok universe of Ray, they're also very similar in that their guilt, their passions, and their desire for closure and forgiveness. Here, every aspect of the hour is pitch perfect, nailing as it does the essence of Ray at his best: gentleness, humor, and human folly. Wildly imaginative and yet unfailingly familiar, this is, in my opinion, the best of the lot. And yes, if would Satyajit Babu have liked this is a criterion for success, I can guarantee he would have. Which brings me to the fourth. Vasan Bala's entry to me is, again, in my opinion, an absolute failure, because it neither gets the central idea right, nor does it get the tropes. Of course, there is a lot of what is a homage, names of Satyajit Ray films and dialogues, and in t-shirt designs, a character based on Robi Ghosh, but these are gimmicks in the vein of the song Akira Kurosawa in Chintuji. But that does not a reimagination make. Unless you told me that Spotlight was based on Satyajit Ray's Spotlight, I would never have guessed that it was. This is South Mumbai interprets Satyajit Ray in jokes on drugs and weed and Bollywood and angst. It's all very meta and chill. Not that the premise is bad. It would have been great if it had been pulled off very well. After all, we're talking about imagination. But no, it doesn't. It just falls flat on its face and remains there throughout. One main reason for that is Harshvardhan Kapoor. I don't know if casting a non-actor as a non-actor is a kind of a super in-joke. Maybe if I was smoking weed, it would be, I would get the joke. But how any of this had anything to do with the world of Ray or his themes was totally lost on me. Overall, the first season was like a mixed bag. It's a mixed bag, like a chahal over, I would say. Some deliveries pitch right, some misses the mark by a bit, and one by quite a lot. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this review.